How do you live in a world where you're simultaneously everything and nothing? Where you're a fragile collection of atoms on a rock hurtling through infinite space, utterly insignificant in cosmic terms, yet somehow the only thing in the known universe capable of contemplating that very insignificance. You felt this, haven't you? Late at night, scrolling through your phone, you stumble across some article about the scale of the universe. Billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars. And suddenly you feel it, that vertiginous sense of your own smallness. You're a speck. Your problems, meaningless. Your achievements, they'll be forgotten before the cosmic clock even notices you existed. But here's what's strange. Even as you're feeling cosmically relevant, part of you rebels against that feeling. Because you know things. You understand mathematics. You create art. You love people. You ask questions about the meaning of existence itself. And that capacity, that ability to think about your own thinking, seems to elevate you above mere physical matter. So which is it? Are you nothing or everything? Wretched or magnificent? Blaise Pascal, a 17th century French mathematician and philosopher, would say, "You're both, irreducibly, paradoxically, maddeningly both." And the fact that you can't resolve this tension isn't a bug in your thinking. It's the fundamental feature of human existence. Pascal spent his short life. He died at 39, thinking about paradoxes. Not cute logical puzzles, but genuine contradictions woven into the fabric of reality and human nature. Paradoxes that, when you really sit with them, feel like they're breaking your brain because they resist easy resolution. And what fascinates me most is this. Pascal didn't write about these paradoxes as an intellectual game. He wrote about them because he believed understanding these contradictions was the key to understanding yourself, to living authentically, to making the most important decision of your life. Today, we're going to explore 7 of Pascal's most brain-breaking paradoxes. And I warn you, these aren't gentle thoughts. They're uncomfortable. They'll make you question patterns you've lived by for years. If you've ever felt that tension between your cosmic insignificance and your felt sense of mastering, you're not confused. You're seeing clearly. Pascal would say you're finally being honest. If you've ever wondered why achieving your goals left you feeling empty, or why you can't sit alone with your thoughts for 10 minutes without reaching for distraction, or why you're simultaneously drawn to and repelled by the big questions about meaning and mortality, Pascal diagnosed exactly what you're experiencing. 350 years ago. By the end of this exploration, you won't have resolved these paradoxes. Pascal would say that's impossible, but you'll understand why you feel the way you do. You'll have language for tensions you felt but couldn't name. And you'll have a framework for living authentically within the contradictions rather than fleeing from them. If you want to discover more thinkers who confront life's deepest questions without flinching, subscribe to this channel where we explore philosophy that actually transforms how you see reality. Let's start with Pascal's foundational paradox, because everything else flows from this. Here's what Pascal observed. Humans are the strangest creatures in existence. We're simultaneously the most wretched and the most magnificent things in the universe. Think about wretchedness first. You're mortal. You're going to die, probably without warning, and everything you built will crumble to dust. You're weak. A slight fever can kill you. You're ignorant. You don't understand most of what happens in your own body, let alone the cosmos. You're self-deceiving. You lie to yourself constantly about your motives, your goodness, your importance. Pascal writes, "Man is but a reed, the most feeble thing in nature. A virus can destroy you, a car accident, a random blood clot. Your existence hangs by a thread, and that thread will inevitably break. But here's the paradox. You're also a thinking reed. You know you're going to die. You contemplate your own mortality. You understand mathematics and physics. You create symphonies and cathedrals. You love. You sacrifice yourself for others. You ask questions about the meaning of existence. You're the universe becoming conscious of itself." Pascal continues, "All our dignity consists in thought. It is from this we must raise ourselves, not from space and time." In other words, yes, You're physically nothing, but your capacity for thought makes you greater than everything that could crush you, because you know it could crush you. Do you see the paradox? You're simultaneously beneath contempt and worthy of infinite dignity. Both statements are completely true. You can't resolve this by choosing one side. I remember the first time this really hit me. I was reading about the scale of the observable universe, 93 billion light years in diameter, while sitting in my apartment paying bills. And I thought, what does any of this matter? My mortgage payment? My career anxieties? In cosmological terms, I'm already dead. I already never existed. But then I thought, wait, I'm the thing doing the thinking. I'm the point where the universe is contemplating its own vastness. That's something. Pascal would say, yes, you've just discovered the human condition. You're caught between two infinities, the infinitely large, the cosmos, and the infinitely small, subatomic particles. You're suspended between everything and nothing. And this suspension creates a tension that defines your entire existence. This is why you feel dissatisfied even when you have everything. Because finite pleasures can't satisfy a creature aware of infinity. You're not broken for feeling this way. You're seeing accurately. Now here's what's crucial. Most people can't live with this tension. So they do something Pascal observed with devastating clarity. They distract themselves. Which brings us to our next paradox. Pascal identified something he called divertisement, distraction. And he didn't mean it as a neutral term. He meant it as diagnosis. Here's the paradox. Humans are the only creatures who can't bear to be alone with themselves. Yet the only way to truly know ourselves is through solitary confrontation with our own thoughts. Pascal writes, I have discovered that all the unhappiness of men arises from one single fact, that they cannot stay quietly in their own room. Wait, you might think, that's too harsh. We need recreation. We need rest. Scrolling social media after work isn't existential avoidance. It's just relaxing. But notice what happens when you try Pascal's experiment. Sit in a quiet room. No phone, no book, no music. Just you and your thoughts for 30 minutes. Most people can't do it. The anxiety becomes unbearable within minutes. Why? Pascal would say, because when you stop distracting yourself, you're forced to confront the big questions. Your mortality, the meaning of your life, whether you're living according to your deepest values or just following a script someone else wrote. These thoughts are terrifying, so we flee into activity, not necessarily a productive activity. Pascal would say most busyness is just elaborate avoidance. We binge watch shows. We scroll endlessly. We fill every moment with podcasts and music and notifications. We create elaborate careers and social lives that keep us constantly occupied. And here's the paradox. This distraction is simultaneously necessary and destructive. It's necessary because, as Pascal admits, constant confrontation with existential questions will be psychologically unbearable. You can't function if you're always meditating on death and meaninglessness. You need to pay your bills, do your work, maintain relationships. But it's destructive because if you never confront these questions, you sleepwalk through life. You make major decisions, career, marriage, where to live, based on autopilot rather than genuine self-knowledge. You reach the end of your life having never really asked what you were doing here. Think about Sunday night anxiety, that dread before Monday morning. Pascal would recognize that feeling instantly. It's not just about work being unpleasant. It's your soul quietly asking, is this what I'm spending my one life doing? Is this it? But instead of sitting with that question, we distract ourselves. We watch something. We scroll. We plan the week ahead. Anything to avoid the uncomfortable encounter with our own deeper questions. I've tested this in my own life, and it's humbling. I set a timer for 20 minutes and sat in silence. No phone, no music, just me. Within 5 minutes, my brain was generating to-do lists, rehashing old arguments, planning future conversations. Anything to avoid just being present with myself. And when I pushed through that, what arose was uncomfortable. questions about whether my daily routine actually aligns with what I claim to value, awareness of relationships I've neglected, mortality anxiety, the kind of thoughts I usually suppress with productivity and entertainment. Pascal's point isn't that you should live in constant existential crisis. His point is that strategic, intentional confrontation with these questions is necessary for authentic living, and that requires periodically stepping off the hamster wheel of distraction. But, and this is crucial, even this confrontation reveals another paradox, because when you do confront yourself honestly, you discover something disturbing. Here's a paradox that will genuinely mess with you. The more you know yourself, the more you realize you don't know yourself. And the more you realize you're actively deceiving yourself. Pascal writes, "It is natural for the mind to believe and for the will to love, so that for want of true objects, they must attach themselves to false ones." Let me translate that into a modern scenario. You tell yourself you work long hours because you're providing for your family. That's your stated motivation. Noble, right? But if you're honest, really honest, might you also be working long hours because you're avoiding problems at home? Or because your identity is wrapped up in being successful? Or because you're terrified of confronting what your life would mean if you weren't constantly productive? The truth is probably all of the above. Multiple motivations, some noble, some base, all mixed together. And you're simultaneously aware of this complexity and actively hiding it from yourself. If this kind of psychological realism resonates with you, if you're tired of shallow self-help and want philosophy that actually confronts the darkness, hit like so more people discover thinkers who don't flinch from uncomfortable truths. Here's what Pascal observed. We're masters of self-deception. We construct elaborate narratives about who we are and why we do what we do. And these narratives are partly true, which makes them convincing, but also partly self-serving lies. Think about your last major argument with someone you love. In the moment, you were certain you were right. Your motivations were pure. The other person was clearly wrong. But days later, when you're calm, you can admit, maybe you were partly wrong. Maybe your motivations weren't entirely pure. Maybe you were defending your ego as much as you were defending truth. The paradox is this: you need self-knowledge to live well. But the act of seeking self-knowledge reveals how deeply self-deceived you are. And that realization is so uncomfortable that it tempts you back into self-deception. It's like peeling an onion. You remove one layer of self-deception and find another beneath it. You can never get to some pure, fully known self. There's always another layer. Pascal experienced this personally. He was brilliant. A child prodigy who mastered Euclid's geometry at age 12, invented one of the first calculating machines, laid the foundations of probability theory. He could have coasted on his genius. But around age 31, he had what he called his night of fire, a mystical experience that shattered his self-image as a rational, self-sufficient intellectual. He realized his entire identity had been built on pride in his own abilities, and that pride was a form of self-deception, hiding his dependence on God and his deep existential anxiety. After this experience, he abandoned his scientific career and spent the rest of his short life writing fragmentary notes, what would become the Pensées, trying to think honestly about the human condition. And what he concluded was deeply uncomfortable. We can't fully know ourselves through pure introspection. We're too good at lying to ourselves. We need external reference points, God, truth, reality, to expose our self-deceptions. But here's where it gets even more paradoxical. Because the next question is, how do you know which external reference point to trust? Which brings us to Pascal's most famous paradox. You probably heard of Pascal's wager. It's often summarized as, believe in God because if he exists, you win everything. If he doesn't, you lose nothing. But that's a caricature. The real argument is far more psychologically sophisticated and reveals a deeper paradox. Reason itself demands that you make a choice that reason alone cannot justify. Here's how Pascal frames it. You exist in a situation of radical uncertainty. You don't know, can't know with rational certainty whether God exists or not. The evidence is genuinely ambiguous. Smart, honest people disagree. But you can't remain neutral. Because how you live your life is itself a bet. If you live as though God doesn't exist, pursuing only finite pleasures, ignoring ultimate questions, you're wagering on atheism. If you live as though God does exist, seeking transcendent meaning, submitting to divine reality, you're wagering on theism. There's no opt-out option. Not choosing is still a choice. Your life itself is the wager. Now, Pascal says, let's think probabilistically. If you wager on God and you're right, you gain infinite happiness. If you wager on God and you're wrong, you lose some finite pleasures. But Pascal would argue these don't satisfy anyway. If you wager against God and you're wrong, you lose everything, infinite happiness, eternal meaning. If you wager against God and you're right, you gain what? Finite pleasures that you'll lose at death anyway? From a probabilistic standpoint, wagering on God is a rational choice even if the probability of God's existence is very low. Because infinity times even tiny probability overwhelms any finite gain. But here's the paradox. This conclusion, which reason leads you to, requires you to do something reason alone can't accomplish. You can't just decide to believe in God the way you decide to believe 2 + 2 = 4. Belief in God isn't simply intellectual assent to a proposition. It's existential transformation. Pascal's critics jump on this. So you're saying I should fake belief? Pretend to believe just for the payoff? That's cynical. But Pascal anticipated this objection. He writes, you want to be cured of unbelief and you ask for the remedy. Learn from those who were once bound like you. They behaved just as if they did believe, taking holy water, having masses said, and so on, that will make you believe quite naturally. In other words, start with action. Kneel and pray even if you don't believe. Engage in practices, and belief will follow. Or as Pascal puts it, kneel down and you will believe. This is deeply paradoxical. You use reason to conclude that you should seek something beyond reason. You act your way into belief rather than thinking your way into it. The head submits to what the heart must discover. Modern Americans find this disturbing. We want belief to be either purely rational, justified by evidence, or purely emotional, a feeling. Pascal says it's neither and both. It's a decision made in uncertainty that transforms how you see evidence. I've wrestled with this personally. As someone trained in analytical thinking, I want clear evidence before committing, but Pascal forces me to admit, I'm already committed. My life is already a wager. The question isn't whether to bet, but whether I'm betting consciously or unconsciously. And if I'm honest, much of my life has been an unconscious wager on naturalism, not because I've examined the evidence carefully, but because it's a default in my cultural context. I've been betting without realizing I'm betting. Pascal's wager doesn't prove God exists. It proves you can't avoid the existential choice through neutrality, which leads to an even deeper paradox. Why, if God exists, doesn't he make his existence obvious? Why the ambiguity? Why the hiddenness? Pascal's answer reveals perhaps his most profound paradox. God hides himself precisely to reveal who is genuinely seeking him. Think about it this way. If God's existence were rationally undeniable, if he appeared in the sky, unmistakable and irrefutable, you have no choice but to acknowledge him. But you could do so resentfully, rebelliously, out of fear rather than love. Pascal writes, God wishes to move the will rather than the mind. Perfect clarity would help the mind and harm the will. The paradox. God's hiddenness is simultaneously an obstacle to belief and a protection of human freedom. If God were obvious, you couldn't freely choose to seek him. You'd be coerced by evidence. But genuine relationship requires freedom. So God provides enough light for those who want to see, and enough darkness for those who don't. The evidence is genuinely ambiguous, not because God is weak or incompetent, but because he's respecting your freedom to reject him. This is psychologically brilliant. Think about human relationships. If someone pursued you so aggressively that you had no choice but to acknowledge them, you'd feel violated, not loved. But if they give you space, enough hints of interest to pursue if you want, Enough distance to walk away if you prefer, that's respect. Pascal experienced this hiddenness personally. After his mystical experience, he wrote on a piece of parchment that he sewed into his coat and wore for the rest of his life. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not philosophers and scholars. He'd encountered not a philosophical abstraction, but a living presence. And that encounter came not through rational proof, but through the heart. Which brings us to his famous line, "The heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing of." This is an anti-intellectual romanticism. Pascal was one of the greatest mathematicians in history. He's not dismissing reason. He's saying reason operates in one domain, mathematics, science, logic. But there's another domain where different faculties engage. Love, beauty, the sacred. You don't prove to someone they should love their child the way you prove the Pythagorean theorem. The heart recognizes truths that formal logic can't capture. And Pascal says this is how you encounter God, not primarily through rational argument, but through the heart's recognition. But here's the final twist in this paradox. The heart itself can deceive. Remember our earlier paradox about self-deception? Your feelings aren't automatically trustworthy. You can feel something deeply and be completely wrong. So you need both. Reason to discipline the heart's wild impulses, and the heart to reach truths reason alone can't grasp. Neither is sufficient alone. Both are necessary. This is the paradox of Pascal himself. Brilliant mathematician who distrusted reason's limits. Passionate mystic who insisted on intellectual rigor. He refused to choose between heart and mind. He held both in tension. And this tension, this refusal to simplify, is what makes Pascal so challenging and so relevant. Because we live in a culture that wants easy answers. Pure reason or pure feeling. Science or spirituality. Evidence or faith. Pascal says you need both, and the fact that they're in tension isn't a problem to solve. It's the human condition to embrace. Which brings us to the final, most comprehensive paradox, the one that makes sense of all the others. Here's what Pascal would say after showing you all these paradoxes. Now you see why you feel the way you do. You feel simultaneously significant and insignificant because you are both. You're torn between distraction and confrontation because both are partially necessary. You struggle with self-knowledge because self-deception is woven into human nature. You can't resolve faith and reason because they operate in different but complementary domains. You search for a God who seems hidden because hiddenness itself is part of the test. These aren't bugs in your psychology. They're features of reality. And Pascal's ultimate claim, the one that makes sense of all these paradoxes, is this: only Christianity explains why humans are paradoxical creatures. We're fallen beings who retain memory of original nobility. We're made in God's image, but corrupted by sin. We're capable of greatness, but prone to wretchedness. We long for infinity because we were made for it, but we grasp at finite things because we've lost our way. You don't have to accept Pascal's Christian conclusion to benefit from his diagnosis. Even secular readers recognize that Pascal describes the human condition with devastating accuracy. We are contradictory creatures. We do flee from ourselves into distraction. We do deceive ourselves about our motivations. We do make bets about ultimate meaning, whether we realize it or not. But Pascal would say, if you accept the diagnosis, why resist the prescription? If he's right about the disease, maybe he's right about the cure. I'm not here to convert you. I'm here to show you what Pascal saw. You can't resolve these paradoxes through clever thinking. You can't escape them through distraction. You can only live authentically by acknowledging them. The paradoxes don't break your brain to torture you. They break your brain to wake you up, to stop you from sleepwalking through life, to force you to confront what you're actually doing here. And that confrontation, uncomfortable as it is the beginning of authentic living. From now on, when you find yourself reaching for your phone to avoid boredom or silence, you'll remember Pascal's diagnosis. Divertisement. You don't need to become a monk. You just need to ask yourself, what am I avoiding right now? In the coming week, Try Pascal's experiment. Sit in a quiet room alone for 20 minutes. No phone, no book, no distractions. Notice what thoughts arise. Notice the discomfort. Notice the impulse to flee. You'll discover something about yourself. Maybe you'll find anxieties you've been suppressing. Maybe you'll realize your daily routine doesn't align with your stated values. Maybe you'll confront questions about meaning and mortality you've been avoiding for years. And when you make your next big decision, career change, relationship commitment, where to invest your time and energy, remember Pascal's wager, not as a religious argument necessarily, but as a framework. What am I betting my life on? What ultimate reality am I wagering toward through my daily choices? Because you are wagering. The question is whether you're betting consciously or unconsciously, deliberately or by default. Pascal would say, most people never really choose how to live. They just accept the script their culture handed them. They pursue success and pleasure because everyone else is. They distract themselves because silence is uncomfortable. They avoid ultimate questions because they're hard. But you're not most people. You're watching this video because you're willing to think about uncomfortable things. You're willing to confront paradoxes instead of fleeing into easy answers. That willingness, that intellectual courage, is the first step toward authentic living. Don't waste it. There's a phrase from Pascal I can't forget. Man is equally incapable of seeing the nothingness from which he emerges and the infinity in which he is engulfed. Do you feel the weight of that truth? You exist between two abysses, the nothing before you were born, the infinity beyond your comprehension. And your life is this brief flickering moment of consciousness suspended between them. That should terrify you. Pascal says it should, but it should also elevate you, because you're the point where nothing becomes aware of infinity. You're the universe contemplating itself. You're brief and eternal, wretched and magnificent, mortal and capable of touching transcendence. Imagine your life 6 months from now after sitting with these paradoxes. You won't have resolved them. Pascal never promised resolution, but you'll live differently. You'll notice when you're fleeing into distraction instead of confronting what matters. You'll recognize your self-deceptions without destroying yourself over them. You'll make choices consciously instead of sleepwalking through the script. And when you face the ultimate questions, why am I here? What happens when I die? Does any of this matter? You won't panic and flee. You'll sit with the questions. You'll let the paradoxes break your brain open to mystery. This channel exists to discover together the wisdom of thinkers like Pascal, people who face the same eternal questions you and I face, and refuse to settle for comfortable lies. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey. In the next video, we'll discover how Thomas Aquinas reconciled faith and reason in ways that still challenge modern assumptions about knowledge and certainty. See you there. And meanwhile, may you find the courage to confront the paradoxes instead of fleeing from them.